Breaking news out of Houston. Agents just raided the home of a sitting district judge, uncovering a fortified underground bunker.
It's the hidden nerve center of a massive underworld network, masterminded by a top-ranking former official. The justice system hasn't just been compromised, it's been bought.
Watching your own commanding officer get walked out in handcuffs. And you realize you don't know who to trust anymore.
3:47 in the morning, Houston, Texas. Humidity clings to the manicured lawns of the River Oaks district, where multi-million-dollar estates sit in complete stillness. They move through the darkness, 40 agents in tactical black, their footsteps absorbed by the thick morning fog. Inside the primary residence of a sitting federal district judge, the air smells of old oak and expensive Cabernet. Ground-penetrating radar units glide across the stone floor of the private wine cellar, sending pulses of energy deep into the Texas soil. It hits something solid at 11 feet down. On the digital display, a geometric void appears not natural bedrock, but a reinforced concrete chamber with ventilation shafts and a single steel door. Agent Dar Okonkwo moves a heavy rack of French vintages to reveal a hidden seam in the masonry. Freshly oiled hinges glisten under her flashlight, revealing a mechanism that operates with terrifying silence. She pulls off her headset and speaks 3 words into her radio that will shatter the Department of Justice. The announcement that they have the target echoes through the tactical frequency. Underneath the very seat of American law, the Sinaloa Cartel has built a sanctuary. This discovery does more than end a 14-month-long investigation. Beyond these concrete walls, the truth rewrites the entire history of who is actually protecting the most dangerous distribution corridor in Southeast Texas. Investigators spent over a year chasing ghosts in the industrial docks. They were looking at the bottom of the ocean while the shark was sleeping in their own living room. 11:23 at night. 14 months before the judge's wine cellar was breached, the first domino fell. An ICE surveillance unit on the Southeast Industrial Corridor flagged 3 refrigerated semi-trucks rolling in a tight convoy through the Port of Houston access road. They were moving exactly 12 minutes ahead of schedule with fake agricultural permits and counterfeit inspection seals. From the outside, the trucks looked like any other logistics fleet, but the timing was too perfect. DIA analysts in Washington began staring at a pattern spanning 11 months in 6 separate counties. It was the most protected Sinaloa distribution corridor ever built on American soil. Within 48 hours, investigators estimated that over 4 tons of narcotics had passed through this single corridor, completely undetected. Money laundering worth over $60 million had already stained Houston real estate, yet the system remained silent. Inside the encrypted files recovered from that first intercept, agents found a single folder labeled Blueprint. This digital architecture paralyzed federal command for 3 full days because one of the seized burner phones belonged to an account with a federal government email address. At 4:17 in the morning, the silence of the investigation finally broke. FBI breach teams moved like shadows through the pre-dawn Houston fog, striking 6 locations simultaneously. They utilized flashbangs and tactical rams to splinter doors across Harris County and the Gulf Coast. Near a warehouse complex in Pasadena, tactical units discovered a distribution hub disguised as a cold storage facility. Shelving units stacked from floor to ceiling hid 5,760 pounds of high-purity cocaine and 1,100,000 fentanyl pills. Beyond the pills, agents recovered 14 kilograms of black tar heroin and a mountain of methamphetamine weighing nearly 500 pounds. Crates of 47 assault rifles were found leaning against the concrete walls alongside 12 rocket-propelled grenade launchers. Beneath the heavy weaponry, a specific detail stopped the seasoned agents cold. They found stacks of heavy body armor stitched with official Houston Police Department markings. Across town in Sugar Land, cartel logistics coordinators were already burning documents in a fire pit as the perimeter was breached. 3 men sprinted for an armored vehicle but were taken down before they reached the driver. It was in a converted auto shop off Highway 90 that the team found the technological heart of the operation. Underneath a layer of grease and discarded engine parts sat a server rack with military-grade encryption. This hardware had a hardwired connection running to an address that was not on any raid manifest. Analysts pulled the first file and realized the cartel was not just watching the border, they were managing it. On the screen, color-coded shift schedules for United States Border Patrol agents identified every single window of vulnerability. The mission was not a simple drug bust, it was a hunt for the soul of the Texas judicial system. 6 hours later, inside the FBI Cyber Command Unit in downtown Houston, analysts worked in rotating shifts to breach the hardware.
Rerouting the data
The
stream
encryption
now.
on these servers was government-grade technology, typically reserved for high-level federal contractors. It took 3 full hours just to crack the outer layer of the data partition. When the first analyst saw the financial architecture loading onto her screen, she physically pushed back from her desk and signaled for her supervisor without saying a single word. Monitors displayed a complex network of 14 shell companies operating through fake construction firms, a regional restaurant chain, and 2 charitable foundations. All of this money, millions of dollars in consulting fees, funneled into one private trust account. One authorized signatory appeared at the bottom of the digital ledger, a name that made the entire room fall silent. The Honorable Isabella Renee Mercer, a federal district judge with 15 years on the bench, was the owner of the account. Senior Agent Marcus Tellez stared at the screen, his hands shaking as he typed the confirmation request to Washington. He had never seen a sitting judge's name on a cartel payment list in over 22 years of federal law enforcement. Despite the shocking discovery, the blueprint file made it clear that Judge Mercer was only a node in a much larger machine. Someone with military clearance had designed this entire system, someone whose name was absent from the financial records because they were never paid in cash. The identity of the silent partner finally came through not a politician or another judge, but a recently retired regional director named Gordon Harwell Pace. At 2:14 in the afternoon, federal agents surrounded a luxury golf resort in Scottsdale, Arizona. Gordon Harwell Pace sat on the patio wearing a tailored linen shirt and sipping a glass of iced tea as the tactical teams closed in. He did not run, he did not reach for a weapon, and he did not show a single flicker of surprise. This man had spent 11 years in a position that allowed him to see every major interdiction plan before it ever launched. His access codes were still active in 3 separate government databases, even after his retirement. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked at the lead agent with a chilling level of composure that made the entire raid feel like a formality. Behind him, from the back of an arrest van in Houston, a logistics coordinator named Tress watched the federal building and whispered to the empty air. He told the investigators that they had only managed to reach the bottom floor of the building. The analysts back at the field office were starting to realize he was right because the final server layer was finally loading. What they saw next made the previous 14 months of work look like a mere appetizer for the real feast of corruption. Inside the final partition, agents found a roster containing the names of 23 Houston area police officers and 7 Border Patrol agents. 11 state legislators were listed as active consultants, receiving monthly payments to kill asset seizure reform bills in committee. This was the moment the investigation stopped being a drug bust and became a war for the infrastructure of the state itself. Every signature on every warrant for the last decade was now under a microscope. Justice was no longer a blind goddess in Texas, she was a paid employee of the Sinaloa Cartel. At 5:23 in the morning, the Joint Task Force Command Center in the Houston Federal Building looked like a military war room preparing for an invasion. Glowing red markers pulsed across the main screen, identifying 43 separate targets in Harris-Fort Bend, Brazoria, Galveston, and Jefferson counties. Beyond the tactical displays, 1,200 federal agents, 60 SWAT teams, and 18 Black Hawk helicopters stood ready to dismantle a shadow government. Analysts found evidence that this was not a local conspiracy, but a sophisticated national franchise. Along the Texas coastline, 2 United States Navy patrol vessels ran maritime interdiction on Sinaloa shipping routes that had operated with impunity for over a decade. Inside a desert compound outside of Rosenberg, a methamphetamine super lab producing 880 pounds of product every week was breached and reduced to rubble. Federal agents in Laredo discovered a border tunnel system hidden beneath an industrial property featuring rail tracks, electric lighting, and a ventilation system that took years to construct. Underneath the soil of South Texas, the cartel had built an infrastructure that rivaled the official government. By noon that day, The tactical scoreboard read like a report from a combat zone. 8.4 tons of narcotics were seized, $67 million in cash, and assets were frozen and 340 arrests were processed. From inside one of the transport vans, a logistics coordinator looked through the mesh window at the federal building and told his captors they had only reached the bottom floor of the operation. Justice in the state of Texas was being hollowed out from the inside by a parallel system that answered to the Sinaloa Cartel instead of the Constitution. Border Patrol agents involved in the scheme had been logging false patrol route data to create invisible corridors during scheduled cartel convoy windows. Judges had been dismissing high-level cases at the motion stage, ensuring that evidence was never presented in a public courtroom. Legislators in the state capitol had quietly killed 3 separate asset seizure reform bills in committee over the last 4 years. A deputy at one precinct stood in silence as he watched his own sergeant get walked out in handcuffs. In a separate interview room, a court clerk who had processed hundreds of sealed orders for Judge Mercer cried for 20 minutes before she could find the strength to speak. This massive level of institutional rot represented a second infrastructure that functioned with corporate efficiency. Gordon Harwell Pace had used his retired status to sign off on federal contractor credentials, which allowed the cartel to build their own encrypted server networks inside government databases.
Copy that. Make sure
He had
it's
spent
tagged
11
correctly.
years in a position of ultimate trust, using that access to see every major interdiction
Court
plan
accepts
before
your
it was
plea of
launched.
guilty on all counts.
His arrest at the Scottsdale
Sentencing
Golf
will be
Resort was merely the beginning, because the cloud partition linked to his family revealed the terrifying truth of the franchise. Dallas, San Antonio, and New Orleans each had their own versions of the blueprint with identical shell company architectures and the same judicial access strategies already operational. They had turned the American legal system into a delivery service for the Sinaloa Cartel, and Houston was just the pilot program. 2,400 people died of drug overdoses in Harris County last year alone. Inside those statistics, 61% involved fentanyl traced directly back to this specific distribution network. They recovered 89 trafficking survivors across the various raid sites, including one woman held for 11 days in a transit house in Galveston. At the moment of her rescue, she asked agents if she was actually free, a question that still haunts the lead investigators today. The reality of this case is not just a crime story, it is a blueprint for the total collapse of a legal system. It wasn't built with bullets and threats, it was built with judicial signatures and calculated silence. For years, the very people sworn to protect the Constitution were the ones clearing the path for the cartel convoys. Power in the modern age doesn't always need violence, it just needs someone willing to look the other way for a price. Tap the like button right now so this story reaches someone who needs to hear the truth.
We should discuss the expansion
Comment the
plans
word
this
expose if you want these shadow networks dragged into the light of day. Share this video with anyone who still thinks corruption only happens at the bottom of the ladder. Next Friday, we move the investigation to Dallas and San Antonio, where the franchise model is already operational and even more dangerous. Gordon Harwell Pace started asking for a deal on day 2 of his detention. What he offered federal prosecutors in exchange for total immunity is a story we are still uncovering. Subscribe today because the next investigation is darker than this one and part 2 is coming.